So let's move on now and talk a little bit about governance, ecosystems, and kind of we've touched a bit on that myth of the big rewrite as well. So what I'm going to do, Steve, is probably move sort of beyond the organizational conversation to more of the ecosystem conversation in general, because I think that's really important. And whether you're a vendor or an end user of technology, it's really not important just to understand the ecosystem, but to build the right ecosystem as well, because we can't achieve all we need to achieve individually. So when you think about building the right ecosystem, where do you start? I mean, what is an ecosystem to you? You talked in one of the previous sessions about, strategic partnerships and that sort of thing, which can mean many different things. But what's an ecosystem look like to you? Why is it important?
Yeah, well, everything is connected. That's one thing. So you're kidding yourself if you believe that you can make decisions in isolation from the broader concept of the connectedness of the ecosystem. And an ecosystem in terms of the technology vendors and the core technology platforms and middlewares and such like, they're all related, they're partnering, so you need to appreciate that. Secondly, from the point of view of the industry that you're in, healthcare or human services or policing in a public sector context, each state and country has versions of exactly those things. And so the idea that agencies can operate without consideration of the relationship between them and all the other agencies is also naive. And so then you've got ecosystems of people. The people are all connected. They work, blah, blah, blah. So you need to understand and leverage those things and work out ways to not be flying solo. That's the main thing.
It also, can I come in on that, Steve? Because you were talking there about vendors and working with vendors and making effective partnerships with vendors. And yet vendors have commercial objectives, often short-term, quarterly results, that sort of stuff. And people can find vendors quite transactional rather than strategic in the relationship.
Vendors transactional, Peter? Never.
How do you develop a strategic relationship with someone who's inherently transactional?
Yeah, well, the different companies operate different ways for different reasons, depending how they're managed as well. So some of them, you can't change them, but you can also change the way you think about them and the way you relate to them. But when the whole platform plus agile kind of thinking intrinsically leads to vendor lock-in, call it that. So, if you make a strategic commitment to an application development platform, just pick one, Microsoft or OutSystems or something, that is not a transactional relationship. And it cannot be. The vendor may have reasons in terms of their global marketing and sales strategy to behave transactionally at times, but you have to manage those relationships as long-term strategic partnerships. And I've become a great fan of Kate Wittesek's vested model for these things, relational contracting. And the vested model is all about the idea of understanding the vested interests of the parties and coming up with relational contractual mechanisms to work together to pursue those vested interests. And that's a totally different mindset to most public sector agency procurement and contract management.
Well, it's funny because I often see it as a game of poker in the traditional sense, with you trying to outbluff each other. But you're sort of saying, understand what's the other party's goals, and then you can sort of see where you can marry.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting point, isn't it? Because I had a conversation with a CIO probably about 12 months or so ago. And to your point there, Steve, that vested interest, we were there with a particular vendor. There were like 12, 14 CIOs. And I was kind of trying to get input from the CIOs in terms of, okay, what are you looking for from a vendor? And one of them said, hang on a minute. Wait a minute. He said, we need to understand what the vendor needs from us to succeed as well. So it's that vested interest point. And it's not just about making the deal. It's about what are their sort of KPIs, what are they trying to achieve as well is really important, I think, as we consider this. But the other point also is that when we've done a lot of research in terms of trying to understand what makes a strategic partnership real, it's a vested interest piece, but it's also you take the wins together, but you take the losses together as well. I think that's really important. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And the vested model, the notion of relational contracting, the reason it's called that is you're actually writing into the contract the governance and management mechanisms that enable you to manage under a vested kind of mindset, which in the most of it is about joint decision making to pursue the agreed outcomes.
Okay.
And that can be for better or worse.
I want to get to governance in a moment, Steve, but before that, I want to look at the point you made that nobody's an island. We all are interrelated to people. And I know some of the environments you've worked at. And say, for example, there's 8 state governments and territories in Australia. Each have their own police force. Each are running business systems that have been together for 30 or 40 years, held together by Band-Aid. What I'm hearing you say is they should collectively look at how can we solve this problem together. And I wonder how feasible is that objective?
Yeah, it's very difficult, but it is feasible, and it's becoming more and more necessary. Because of increasing costs of systems and the relatively low rate of rise of government appropriation funding relative to those costs. So we're getting ourselves into a bigger and bigger hole. And the only way that we'll get out of it is by collaborating and co-producing is the way I've tried to frame it. And so rather than individual agencies doing individual procurements with no reference to one another and no collaboration or coordination, it makes much more sense for agencies to try and find kind of practical paths forward to agree to use similar platforms or to agree to pool investment in some ways. And maybe it's about sequencing. I'll go first and you can then leverage what I've done or vice versa. Or it's about trying to agree modular capabilities of different solutions and pool the investment in ways. Now it turns out that if you're in a world where your on-prem infrastructure and all of your code is custom built to you as big waterfall programs of work, it's very, very difficult. That's historically true. But if you're increasingly in a world where you're using cloud services platforms and there is the opportunity to agree to use similar platforms, not to all work the same way, but to use similar platforms and common code bases running in cloud services environments which are outside any one agency and therefore available more so to all, then it is possible to do these things. In DHHS, we had a huge success with a system called SafeScript, which was a system created for the regulation of real-time regulation of prescriptions for addictive opioid medications. I think it's something like 4 times as many people in Australia die from addiction to prescribed pain relief medications than from car crashes. So that's a huge problem. There was a national system trying to get everyone to hold hands, did not work because it's all too complicated. So Victoria took the lead and developed a system which was built in as it was at the time, the Microsoft Cloud Services infrastructure. And that system became picked up by other agencies and has become a national system because of agencies choosing to leverage something that already existed in an environment that enabled them to do so, rather than rebuild it again for no purpose. So there's this degree of kind of architectural layered separation happening in the applications, which is creating new flexibility for agencies to decide. Like I sometimes say to people, the most strategic decision in this context is to be the second follower.
That's a good point. It's interesting, isn't it? Because Peter brought up the data word a bit in one of the previous sessions as well. We were talking about data as well, and I was in Canberra a few weeks ago, probably about 50 technology leaders from federal government, and one of the conversations was about this. The challenge about operating across departments is this silos of safety mentality, and that's particularly when it comes to things like data. And as you're talking, I'm thinking there's almost this need to break down this silos of success mentality as well, right?
Yes,
and I think
correct.
that, which is fantastic, and you used a great example there. But who drives that? Is it the individual departments, or is it kind of the overseer, or even the prime minister? But who drives this to break this down?
Yeah, it's back to the capital T transformation kind of conversation. Trying to tackle it as a big bang grand vision, change the world, is just not going to happen. It's only going to be advanced by visionary people who decide to collaborate, and partnering with companies in the market that have a platform or platform-like status or presence in the market. And that's why I think I often talk about it's all about creating ecosystems of co-production, because the goal is to be understanding, where the ecosystems are, and then trying to identify opportunities to pool investment and to collaborate and co-produce as part of that ecosystem, rather than pretending that you can fly solo,
But who governs an environment where you've got all these stakeholders who are peers in some way?
Yep. Well, the way to think of it is in an old school user group. So you've got an application which is common or shared to some degree, but it's customized in the different organizations. And then you've got a user group that comes along and helps work with the vendor to prioritize and identify the next roadmap of upgrades. It's the model is pretty well proven in a capitalist market, industry concept with software as a service and some of the software models. It's just a matter of applying that same way of thinking into industry collaboration around common or shared applications.
And yet the term collaboration in the world that we're living in at present, it seems almost alien. We're living in a world where we talk governance, and governance is autocrats telling us what we all need to do. So I wonder how we get around that.
So it's some great points there. And I think there's probably kind of a couple of things that stand out to me. And that is that, to your point there, Steve, we need to stop pretending that agencies actually operate alone, right? So I think what we're saying here is we need to identify, but also acknowledge interdependence and the opportunities that they can bring collectively. I think it would be a good point here. The other thing also is that, and you kind of touched on this, was that it's almost a need to sort of pool capability. And also, share the wins, share perspectives on different vendors, so that we can ultimately almost share vendor capacity as well, because the vendors are stretched as well. We've got very little time to actually engage with the vendors, and they're stretched thin as well. So make sure we can sort of pool those capabilities. But the other thing you also talked a bit about was really how we can potentially build microservices collaboratively, right, rather than independently. I think, would that be a fair sort of summarization?
Yeah, absolutely correct. And you can look at that in the way that vendors would look at the development of code modules, and the smarter ones are already starting to get with this idea. And it means actually that the vendors themselves have got to proactively lean into this way of thinking, because they can also be evil agents in the divide and conquer,
Yes.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I'm interested as well, Steve. So we've had, I think, some great conversations there. We appreciate your time with this, but I'm going to just ask you one final question. Okay, so you're, I'm a new CIO, right? I'm walking into, let's say, a major department in one of the state governments. What would be the three things? President of the USA, the new incoming president.
Yeah.
There's always an envelope in the drawer, right? Here's the three things you need to do. Well, what would be your envelope in the drawer for that new CIO?
Look, the first one is stop fixating and thinking about projects, and instead reconceptualize the things you need to do in terms of platforms and capability and people. We have to break out of the cycle of transactional project-based thinking. Yeah, that's the first one. And use any opportunity to do that. Second one is delivery cadence matters more than ambition. So, the things you're gonna do in your grand plan, strategy, ambition, PowerPoint deck, etc., 3-year roadmap are irrelevant if you are not able to put together a cadence of delivery now. And start talking about what you have done, not what you're gonna do. So that's the second point. And the third one is this aligning the vested interest of your vendors. So your vendors can be your greatest friend, but if you're brutalizing them in everything that you do, then they're just frustrating you, and you're not tapping into the value that they can bring.
Okay. Excellent. There's some great takeaways there, Peter, I think, for the incoming CIOs.
I've got a lot of points out of that, Steve. I'd love to go a lot farther. Matt's holding me back from coming in with some other questions for our time, for our listeners today. But I'm interested how you actually plan ahead when 3 years seems incomprehensible in a world. If you're planning for 3 years, what will the world look like in that time? So it is challenging.
Yeah. It is. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. In some ways, that's why I say you just have to work out how to get stuff done now.
Yep. Yeah. That's always
the
biggest challenge.
the smart thinking is how to do that whilst at the same time building enduring capability.
Well,
so every single dollar has to work as hard as it possibly can, kind of thing.
And it's the message of being digitally fit. That's what you need to aspire to.